The wind howled, a mournful dirge against the rattling window panes of the old farmhouse. Sarah shivered, pulling her woolen shawl tighter around her. It was another one of those nights, the kind where the darkness felt less like an absence of light and more like a heavy, breathing presence. She glanced at the old grandfather clock in the hall, 1:47 a.m. Her husband, Mark, was still out on a call. He was a long-haul truck driver, and his routes often took him far from their isolated home. Tonight, however, felt different. A sense of unease had been gnawing at her since dusk. It wasn't just the storm, though it was a fierce one, battering the house with rain and wind. It was something else, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, a feeling of being watched. She tried to dismiss it as an overactive imagination, fueled by her recent binge of true crime podcasts. But the feeling persisted, cold and insistent. She decided to make herself some chamomile tea, hoping the warmth and ritual would soothe her frayed nerves. As she busied herself in the kitchen, a faint scratching sound emanated from the back door. Her heart leaped in her throat. It couldn't be Mark. He always used the front door. And it certainly wasn't their dog, Buster, who was curled up, snoring peacefully in the living room. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, like fingernails dragging across wood. Sarah froze, clutching the teacup so tightly her knuckles turned white. She slowly, cautiously tiptoed towards the back door, peering through the small, frosted glass pane. Nothing. Just the blurring streaks of rain. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely a whisper, thick with fear. The scratching stopped abruptly. Silence descended, thick and suffocating, broken only by the roar of the wind. Sarah stood there for a long moment, her breath held captive in her chest. Had it been the wind, after all? A branch, perhaps? She tried to rationalize it, to find a logical explanation, but the memory of the deliberate, scraping sound clung to her. She backed away from the door, her eyes scanning the dimly lit kitchen as if expecting something to materialize from the shadows. As she turned to go back to the living room, a faint thud echoed from upstairs. It sounded like something had fallen. Panic began to coil in her stomach. She knew she was alone. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the treacherous, unpaved road. Mark wouldn't be back for hours. She grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the rack above the stove, its familiar weight a small comfort in her trembling hands. Slowly, carefully, she ascended the creaking stairs. Each step sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence of the house. The thud had come from the spare bedroom, a room they rarely used, filled with old furniture and forgotten boxes. As she approached the door, she noticed it was ajar, a sliver of darkness visible within. She was certain she had closed it earlier that day. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed the door open, the skillet held ready. The room was dark, the curtains drawn, but enough moonlight filtered through the storm clouds to cast eerie shadows. Nothing seemed to be out of place. No fallen objects, no disturbed boxes. Just the silent, dusty room. Then she saw it. On the pristine white duvet of the unused bed, a single, muddy footprint. It was distinct, clear, and far too large to be her own. Her blood ran cold. Someone was in the house. She retreated, her mind racing, her heart hammering against her ribs. She needed to call the police, but her phone was downstairs on the kitchen counter. She crept back down the stairs, her eyes darting to every shadow, every creak of the old house. The scratching at the back door seemed to echo in her mind. As she reached the bottom step, a guttural groan resonated from the living room. It was deep, rasping, and utterly terrifying. It wasn't human. Not quite. Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore through the silence. She dropped the skillet with a deafening clang and stumbled backward, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the living room. A shape was emerging from the darkness, slow and deliberate. It was tall, impossibly so, and thin like a starved scarecrow. Its limbs were disproportionately long, and its head seemed to tilt at an unnatural angle. In the faint light, she could make out two pinpricks of red that glowed with a malevolent intensity, like embers in a forgotten fire. It wasn't wearing clothes, but its skin appeared to be covered in rough, dark patches, almost like bark. It took another slow, dragging step, and another, its movements jerky and unnatural. A foul, cloying smell, like damp earth and decay, filled the air. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her legs were rooted to the spot, paralyzed by an ancient, primal terror. The creature let out another low, rattling groan, and this time, she could make out something in its hand. A rusty, claw-like tool, glinting dully in the sparse light. It was the same sound she had heard scratching at the door. It began to advance, slowly, menacingly. Sarah found her voice again, a choked, desperate plea. Who are you? What do you want?" The red eyes seemed to fix on her, and a low, guttural chuckle rumbled from its chest. The sound was dry, like leaves skittering across a tombstone. It raised the claw-like tool, its shadow stretching long and distorted on the wall behind it. Just as Sarah braced herself for the inevitable, a blinding flash of light erupted from the front of the house, followed by the roar of an engine. Mark's truck. He was home. The creature froze, its head snapping towards the sound. The red eyes seemed to dim for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something that resembled surprise. Then, with an agility that belied its gaunt frame, it turned and melted back into the shadows of the living room, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. Sarah collapsed to the floor, shaking uncontrollably, gasping for air. The front door burst open, and Mark rushed in, his face etched with worry. "Sarah, I heard you scream. What happened?" he cried, taking in her terrified state and the dropped skillet. She tried to speak, but only incoherent sobs escaped her lips. Mark held her, comforting her, his presence a warm anchor in the storm of her fear. Eventually, she managed to gasp out fragments of her ordeal, the scratching, the footprint, the creature. Mark, ever the practical one, searched the house thoroughly. There was no sign of anyone or anything. The back door was still locked from the inside, the spare bedroom untouched except for the phantom footprint that was now gone. The only remaining evidence was the faint, lingering scent of decay and the terror etched deep into Sarah's soul. They never saw the creature again, but the memory of that night became a permanent resident in their home, a shadow in the corners of their minds. Sarah never looked at the woods surrounding their farmhouse the same way, always feeling a prickling sensation on her neck, a lingering fear that one night the scratching would return, and this time Mark might not arrive in time. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Let me know if you have any recommendations or if you would like to share some true scary stories.